There are three types of EAS systems available. Those are the TFT, the Sage, and the DASDEC. And in all three cases, almost every single system that's being used would be using the serial interface between the EAS unit and the master control. There is one other application that can be used, which is in the DASDEC model. They have an Ethernet interface, which would carry an MP3 audio file, and you wouldn't have to worry about what we're going to go through right now. But most likely, if you're watching this, you would have to set this up just like I'm going to demonstrate here. So what the first thing that you need to determine is physically where you're going to bring the audio from your EAS system into the master control. Now, this is for an MC2020 application. If you look up here in the audio only section, there's 4 buttons. The red buttons indicate that that's the program bus and what's currently on the air. The far left button, if you were to walk over to your master control right now, that's generally where that button's pressed, and that's generally where the audio is. That's the on-air audio. If you wanted to put any other audio, there's 3 external audios that can be used, which are the next 3 buttons. If you press any one of those, then that will take whatever is coming into those specific physical inputs on the back of the 2020 frame and put it over the top of what's currently on the program bus. Or sorry, no, in this case it would actually play it in place of what's on normally on the program bus. If you wanted to use the over, then whatever's on the preview bus up here on the white, and you press one of these 3 buttons up here and press the over button, that will give you the over. But in the case of the EAS, you're going to need to select which one of these 3 external AES audio inputs you want to use. We'll demonstrate this as the very first one here. Now these buttons in the software when we go into this application are buttons 1 is the first one on the left, 2, 3, and 4 in that order. So as we build this macro, you'll see that we're going to use button 1, which is the first button, and button 2. Those are the 2 that we're going to be interfacing with here for this macro. Now, what happens is the EAS system sends the serial information to the master control, and at that time, it also plays out audio. And when the audio comes in, it will, when all of this kind of happens at the same time, but when we demonstrated this in the setup of the EAS, if you look here again, actually there won't be an EAS in here. I'll show you this in just a moment. After we build the macro and decide which input that's going to be used, then we can go into the EAS setup and choose that macro that we have set up for the audio to play out on. Okay, so let's go up to the top here on your MC config software again. Remember, MC config is found probably in your shortcuts folder, but if not, you'll find it somewhere probably on your C drive in the USI folder. And you should be running the latest version to do this, which would be at least 3.0 build 6 or newer. I think build 9 is even the newer version as of the beginning of 2010. That's when we're doing this. Okay, macro. So if you go into the edit macro screen, now first of all, you need to do a retrieve. I don't know how familiar you are with this, so let's back out one step here. You're going to go up to communication. You're going to select a target to configure. I don't have any currently in my tables right now, but you'll select your master control 2020 from here. Click OK, and then go up to File and perform a retrieve. Okay, it'll highlight, and you'll be able to perform a retrieve. Once you've done that, you'll be able to read out what's in all of your different buttons that come directly from the master control. Editing the macros, this table may already have this set up in here for you. Generally, we send this out defaulted and ready to go. If not, I'm going to show you how to do this from scratch. Okay, so what you'll do is you'll click on New up here in the macro list. This identifies and gives a description of the current macro. Okay, and we'll just call this, and remember this is for all formats, for all units, TFT, Sage, and the DASDEC. So this is EAS audio control, or you can call it anything. You can call it anything you'd like, because this really doesn't matter. It's just a description. Now, when we created this new macro, you'll notice down here 2 lines were created. These are 2 lines that must be in here. Any additional lines, which I'll show you that you're going to need, you'll have to insert. But for sure, you have to always have in any macro you build these two lines. The first line is always going to say on for the action, and then it's going to be expecting you to put something in here. So if you drop down this arrow, what you're going to be choosing is audio only. Okay, and then in the function, you drop down the function, you're going to be choosing the program input. Remember, that's the red bus over here, program input. Because all we're going to be doing is making this go from on air to the EAS audio so that the viewers will hear the audio coming from the EAS. Okay, and then the value for this is the number of that button. Remember, 1, 2, 3, 4. So we're going to be going from button 1 right now, which is already on, to button 2. We want this to push button 2, which is where our EAS audio is coming into, the AES from the EAS unit. Okay, and then the state is going to be on. This is as if you were to be physically pressing the on button yourself. That's how these macros work. So that on means that if you were to do this manually, this is automatic, but if you were doing it manually, it would be expecting you to push the button on. So button 2 on as you press the button. Okay, now we're going to need another line here because when the macro finishes, we want that macro to then go back to button 1. Okay, so go down here under ID, click on the second line, and then on your keyboard of your computer's keyboard, press the word insert, and it'll give you another line. You can also do new up here, and it'll give you another line, okay, right above it here. Okay, there's no action that's required. The only thing you need to do here is click on the audio only again. It's going to be again the program input. This time we want it to go back to button 1, and this time we're going to be saying that it is now off and finished. That is the entire macro for the audio. So if you come down here under macro verification and click verify, it should come back down here with the results saying that it's good to go. Okay, now that is required for every single type of EAS system because they all use this audio. You'll have to do the physical connections, of course, to make this work, but this is the macro. Okay, now, if you have a Sage unit, there's one more macro that will need to be set up, and I'm going to show you that right now. So click on New at the top. Now, this is what we call the Sage alert, or GPI alert. Sorry, this is for the GPI action. You absolutely have to have a macro set up for a GPI setup for the system, and it needs to be triggered by this macro needs to be triggered by that GPI. Okay, now down here under line number 1, you notice it created a macro number 2. So the ID 1 is macro 1, ID 2 is macro 2. Okay, so now we'll drop down, and what you want to select is graph. Down at the bottom here, you're going to select graphics, and then you're going to drop this down and turn on the alert play. Okay, there is no value, but the state needs to be turned on. And this is just software that is required without an explanation here. It's just the way that the Sage works. That is the command that is needed to turn on. If it's a Sage unit, it needs this additional macro. TFTs and DASDECs do not require this, but the Sage does. It works differently. So the software and the code here needs to be different. So click on this next line down here, and you can click New, or you can click Insert. Okay, then go ahead and select the graphics again. And this will also require another alert play. And then we're going to select the state as being off. Okay, and that's the entire macro. So if you click Verify, it should say there's no errors. Okay, so those are the two macros that are required. Again, macro 2 is only for a Sage. Otherwise, all three of them will look the same with at least macro number 1 being in there. Then you'll click OK here. Now, the other step I was explaining is you have to come up to the EAS, drop down this EAS configuration, and then under the audio macro number right here, this is how it gets triggered. This is how the audio plays out. You're going to drop this down and choose, which ours is already selected on number 1, but we're going to choose number 1. Okay, macro number 2 is triggered a little bit differently. Let's click OK here. Now, macro number 2 is triggered by, if you come up here to the relay table and you go to the GPI optos, in the 2020, when you drop down the optos here, you will see on your system that you'll have a 17 through, actually before we do that, let's double check that we have the right, see again, remember my system's not hooked up with a master control right now. You'll want to make sure you go up to relays and then properties and click on the 16 relays and 5 optos button. And remember, this is only for a Sage. And on a 2020, this card that we're selecting the different type here is a physical board. So that's something else you'll need to check in your Master Control 2020 on the CPU card. There'll be a daughter board. It's a relay board. You'll either have 21 relays on yours, or there'll be 16 relays and 5 optos. That is required. There's an optional card. You'll have to call Utah and get one if you don't have one. So click OK. And then we go to your relay opto again, go to GPIs, and you drop down the arrow here, you will see, there they are. Okay, so number 17 through 21, all of ours are available. If they were already being used somewhere, they would not show up in this table. So we'll pick number 17. The function that we're going to want this to play out is a macro, and the value is the macro that we created, which was macro number 2. Okay, and then we want that to be a latch. We want that to stay closed until we decide that it's done, and when that's finished, the latch will then open and completing the macro. So what happens is the GPI comes in on the input number 17 on the back of the 2020. You'll have to read your manual to figure out how to get that connected onto it's going to be on the relay B relay port on the back of the 2020 chassis. That's where you'll wire that into. There's a little bit more than that, but that's where it's going to eventually end up. It also needs to be energized by a 5-volt, 12-volt source. So you'll have to read in the manual how to do all of that. But you bring it into 17. When it gets that trigger from the Sage, at the same time the serial port gives its serial information, the audio will play out. This GPI will trigger macro number 2, and it will begin the actual EAS alert through the master control, and away you go. When you're finished, of course, with all of this, you have to come up to the top, click File, Send Configuration to Target, and then when that's all finished, you'll walk over to your 2020, and don't forget you have to press the reset button on the top of the CPU card. There's 2 reset buttons on the on the inner side of the CPU card, and it's the one at the very top. It should be an orange little button right up there above the Cat 5 jack. Okay, and that is how you would set up your macros and your GPI.